Tidus was the son of a legendary blitzball star named Jacked. By the age of 18, Tidus himself became not only the captain of his home city's blitzball team, the Zanarkand Apes, but became a blitzball star himself, with his skills in the sport only being rivaled by his father. During a championship blitzball match in his hometown of Zanarkand, the city would be attacked by a creature named Sin. However, Tidus managed to survive the ordeal. It was also at this time that Tidus ran into his childhood protector, Auron, and the two would fight their way in an attempt to escape the city. However, Auron himself had other plans for the two of them, and using a portal from within Sin's body, the two would be transported 1,000 years into the future to the land of Spira. After a quick encounter with a small crew of Albeit travelers, and surviving a second attack by Sin, Tidus would wash up in the island of Besaid, and it was here that Tidus would meet his future allies. The captain of the blitzball team, the Besaid Aurochs Waka, the powerful black mage Lulu, the Ronso warrior Kamari, and the young summoner Yuna. Tidus agreed to travel with Yuna and her guardians to the city of Luca, and it was here that Tidus would meet up once again with his childhood protector Auron. Auron informed Tidus that his father Jack had become Sin, and the reason Auron brought him to Spira was to keep his promise to his father to have Tidus help defeat him. It was also at this time that Tidus and Auron were officially elevated to the status of Guardian for High Summoner Yuna. Tidus would travel with Yuna and her guardians all across Spira, praying at all the temples to gain all the powers of the Aeons. However, once the party had reached the peak of Mount Gagazet, Tidus would pass out and was told by the faith of the Aeon Bahamut that he himself was a dream of the faith, and once Sin and his creator Yevon were defeated, he would disappear. Knowing this, Tidus chose not to inform his fellow guardians of this truth and would continue on with Yuna's pilgrimage. High Summoner Yuna and her guardians would eventually fight their way into the bowels of Sin itself, and it was there that they managed to defeat Yevon, bringing forth the eternal calm for Spira. Once all the fighting was over, Tidus began to disappear, and after saying his final goodbyes to Yuna and her fellow guardians, Tidus would jump off the Albeit airship and would disappear completely. Cloud was born in the mountain village of Nibelheim and was neighbors with Tifa Lockhart. His father died when he was young, and he was raised by his mother. As a child, Cloud had no close friends, and perhaps as a coping mechanism, convinced himself that he was superior to the other village children, so he did not care for their company. At the age of 13, Cloud learned of Sephiroth and his exploits, and resolving to become a hero just like him, Cloud decided to set out and join the Shinra military forces in an attempt to become a member of Soldier. He called Tifa out to a water tower to tell her about his plans to depart, hoping to impress her, and upon his request promised to rescue her if she ever found herself in trouble. The following spring, he left for Midgard. After joining Shinra, his dreams of ever joining Soldier were sadly cut short, and he would be downgraded to becoming a simple infantryman for the Shinra army. 2 years later, after joining Shinra, while Cloud was on a simple scouting mission with his platoon, he would encounter the young first-class soldier Zack Fair, and the two would become immediate best friends, recognizing that they had so much in common. Cloud would run into Zack on several missions from that point on, and would eventually be assigned to a mission to his hometown of Nibelheim, where he would have the opportunity to work alongside the legendary soldier Sephiroth. After arriving in Nibelheim, he would see his old friend Tifa Lockhart, but ashamed by his fear to ever become a member of Soldier, he would hide his identity from her and the townspeople. At some time, Cloud would witness Sephiroth suffer a psychotic outburst and would watch as he began killing everyone throughout the town of Nibelheim, and would even witness the death of his mother. Enraged by this, Cloud would chase Sephiroth to the Maker Reactor, where he would see both Tifa and Zack injured by Sephiroth's assault. Picking up Zack's busted sword, he would stab Sephiroth in the back, mortally wounding him. However, after tending to his friend Tifa, Sephiroth would re-emerge, and as Cloud attempted to re-engage him, he would be impaled by a sword. Despite being injured, Cloud would manage to summon up the strength to toss Sephiroth over the edge of the platform right into the lifestream of the Maker Reactor. After being recovered by Dr. Hojo, Cloud and Zack would be experimented on for 4 years until Zack would awake and would rescue Cloud from his test tube. With Cloud suffering from a high level of Mako poisoning, Zack would have to carry Cloud's vegetated body to the outskirts of Midgard, where the two were intercepted by a large Shinra army military force. Zack laid Cloud's body out of sight while he went off to fight off the army, and despite Zack fighting bravely, he was eventually overwhelmed and gunned down. In Zack's last moments, he told Cloud that he was his living legacy and gave him his Buster Sword, dying a few moments later. After Zack's death, Cloud would go through a dramatic transformation. Due to a combination of the trauma caused by the Nibelheim incident, the Mako poisoning, and witnessing Zack's death, Cloud impressed Zack's memories and some of his fighting abilities onto his own, along with Tifa's memories of creating a reality in his mind that he himself had joined Soldier and that Zack had never existed, claiming that he was a former first-class soldier. Shortly after this event, Cloud would run into Tifa in the Sector 7 slums train station, and after being nursed back to health, Tifa would ask Cloud to join the anti-Shinra terrorist group Avalanche. Cloud agreed, and after joining forces with fellow Avalanche member Barrett Wallace, would successfully destroy Midgard's Sector 1 Maker Reactor. After taking part in a second mission to destroy another Maker Reactor, Cloud would be separated from his allies and would fall into the Sector 5's church, and it was there that Cloud would meet for the second time a young flower girl named Aerith, and would agree to become her bodyguard. After Cloud reunited with his friends, Shinra would drop the Sector 7 plate, crushing the Sector 7 slums, and in the process kidnapped Aerith. Cloud would lead an attack on the Shinra headquarters, and after successfully rescuing Aerith and defeating the new president of Shinra, Rufus, would escape Midgard, but not before discovering that the legendary soldier Sephiroth had somehow returned. As Cloud and his friends would travel around the world, they would find themselves traveling to the Temple of the Ancients, and using Aerith's inner power, they were able to discover exactly what the reincarnated Sephiroth was planning and how to stop him. Choosing to go off on her own, Aerith traveled to the Forgotten Capital and began to pray for the Holy, the ultimate white magic to defend against a meteor that Sephiroth was planning to use to destroy the world. Cloud arrived just in time to see Aerith praying, but was forced to watch as Aerith was stabbed in the back by Sephiroth, killing her. Cloud carried her body to a pool of water in the center of the Forgotten Capital and laid her body to rest beneath the water. After recovering from a second dose of Mako poisoning, Cloud and his allies would pursue Sephiroth into the depths of the planet, and with the aid of Aerith's spirit, would not only defeat Sephiroth, but would save the Earth from the oncoming meteor. Well, what's up again there guys, Brian here at 3TR, and welcome to another one of my own Final Fantasy vs. Series matchups. This time I'll be pitting the two main protagonists from my two all-time favorite Final Fantasy games of all time, that being Cloud Strife from Final Fantasy 7 and Tidus from Final Fantasy 10. Now before I begin, I would just like to state right now that I will only be using Cloud Strife as he is shown in the Final Fantasy 7 video game only. I will not be acknowledging any of his combative feats that he is shown in either the Advent Children movie, the Dirge of Cerberus video game, or any of his appearance throughout the entire Kingdom Hearts franchise. And in terms of Tidus, I'll be using him as he was at the end of Final Fantasy X after he and Yuna's group of Guardians had defeated Yu Yevon. And just to satisfy some of you guys out there, I will be acknowledging some combative feats that both of these characters have shown throughout the Dissidia video games. So with that out of the way, let us begin by comparing them physically. Tidus is an 18-year-old human male standing 5'9", and due to his physical build as a star blitzball player, is in great shape with a high skill performance of being very athletic. He is capable of jumping great heights and is extremely acrobatic, capable of performing flips and jumps at remarkable speeds. And in an overall physical sense, it was his speed that gave him his greatest advantage in combat. Being in such great physical shape as a blitzball player made Tidus the key speed fencer of his party, capable of running and dodging attacks at remarkable speeds. However, it has been shown that although he is in great shape, he may not have much upper body strength, as it was shown when Tidus and Auron were escaping Xanarkand during Sin's first attack, and after Auron had handed him over a sword, Tidus had a very difficult time handling the weight of the weapon. However, I do believe that he would have had a good amount of time to develop his strength by some degree over the course of Yuna's pilgrimage. However, Tidus' greatest physical defect was that he clearly was not the toughest member of his group, and his physical qualities clearly state that Tidus is not physically built to take a lot of physical damage, and excessive use of his speed can burn through his stamina faster than anyone. Having said that, Tidus is by no means a complete lightweight, and has proven on multiple occasions that he is more than capable of taking powerful blows from clearly physically superior opponents for a short period of time. He's nowhere near being a human tank who can take great deals of damage over the course of a battle, like his allies Auron and Kimahri, so in a nutshell, Tidus has all the physical qualities of an Olympic track runner with a touch of swimming and some lightweight boxing thrown into the mix. During the time of Final Fantasy VII, Cloud was a 21-year-old human male standing 5'7", and although he officially did not take part in any Shinra soldier class training, Cloud's own physicality was a match for just about any opponent. Just like Zack Fair, after Cloud was impaled by Sephiroth and exposed to a high level of Mako, he was used as a guinea pig in Dr. Hojo's experiments for 4 years and was injected with Genova cells in an attempt to test out his Genova reunion theory. Unlike Zack, however, when Cloud was awakened from his hibernation, Cloud was left in a vegetative state, forcing Zack to have to carry his body for several days, only coming to his senses at the point of Zack's death. Thanks to Dr. Hojo's experiments, Cloud was granted superhuman physical properties, including strength and endurance, which would aid him well during the fall of Shinra and Sephiroth's first resurrection. However, though Cloud had the physical potential of a member of Soldier, Cloud did suffer from a number of physical defects. Without proper training, Cloud was unable to physically balance his combative properties, but instead chose to focus on developing his durability and strength, but neglected to improve his speed and maneuverability, as Zack could do over the course of his career as a member of Soldier, literally turning himself into a human tank. However, these two properties would be improved upon over the coming years following the events of Final Fantasy VII, but during these events, Cloud simply allowed his allies to pick up the slack for what he lacked in a physical sense. When comparing Tidus and Cloud against each other in a physical sense, it's clear to see that they're complete opposites of each other, with speed and maneuverability being in Tidus' corner and strength and durability being in Cloud's. So the question is, which physical traits are more useful in a fight between these two? And in my opinion, it is Cloud's focus on his strength and durability that matters most. With the use of the Genova cells within his body and Dr. Hojo's experiments, Cloud's physical body was essentially upgraded to grant him superhuman levels of performance, making him physically suited for just about any fight. His decision to focus on developing his strength and durability only may make him very ill-prepared to go head-to-head with another member of Soldier. He is perfectly built to take part in a long-standing engagement against just about any other opponent. Tidus may be a significantly faster and harder opponent to pin down, but all of his running around and dodging would burn out his stamina much more quickly than others, which makes Tidus really only being best suited for short-term engagements if forced to fight alone. Quoting Jin Sarai from his Shakti vs Darth Zana matchup, it's better to be able to take 20 hits without flinching than being able to dodge 19 of them but have the one that connects bring you down. Cloud's endurance and durability would allow him to easily withstand nearly every single blow that Tidus would land on him, and as quick and maneuverable as Tidus would be, it would only be a matter of time until Cloud eventually connects, and as soon as Cloud lands even a single devastating hit on Tidus, he may not go down right away, but Tidus would certainly have a much harder time recovering from a hit like that and allow him to continue on the battle effectively. And it is for these reasons that I am giving Cloud Strife the edge in physical capabilities. Though Tidus may not be a very diverse magic caster on his own, like Auron, his magical and special abilities were very combatively focused. His entire magic and skill set was designed around the concept of being able to deliver more hits on his opponents while reducing his opponent's ability to react with a counterattack. With this, Tidus' only magical spells were haste and slow, which allowed Tidus to speed up the combative performance of him and his allies with haste and being able to reduce the combative performance of his enemies with slow. Tidus also posted a series of special attacks which had similar functions like his magic with some diversity. The ability Cheer and Provoke allowed Tidus to raise his party's strength and defense, with Provoke having the ability to force an opponent to focus on him at will. The abilities Delay Attack and Delay Buster had a chance to cancel out an opponent's offensive maneuver, and Quick Hit allowed Tidus to attack with blinding speed, essentially allowing Tidus to always make the first attack. On another note, Tidus may have been a dedicated speed fencer when it comes to his use of the blade. He did have a series of power attacks that he had access to in the name of his overdrive attacks. By the end of Yuna's pilgrimage, Tidus had access to 4 overdrive attacks that all utilized Tidus' exceptional speed and athleticism. His spiral cut was a singular power strike performed after a series of flips. Slice and dice was a random series of 6 passive strikes while running past an opponent. Energy Rain fired a series of energy projectiles at the ground, which caused his opponents to fall off balance. And Blitz Ace was a series of 8 devastating power strikes delivered in blinding speeds and ending with Tidus kicking a blitzball at his opponents to finish them off. In conclusion, Tidus may not have had a lot of magical tricks up his sleeve, but what tricks he did have at his disposal he could apply with great effectiveness. Although Cloud Strife spent most of his time during the events of Final Fantasy VII practically mimicking Zack's use of magical abilities, it is clear that Cloud did not elevate this practice to the same degree. Cloud's use of magic was relatively basic, allowing his allies to develop their skills in this department much higher than himself. The basic materia that Cloud usually carried on him were his use of fire, ice, and thunder materia, and though I do believe that by the end of Final Fantasy VII, Cloud would have developed this materia to its maximum level, his primary use of magic was only to give him a combative option to deal with opponents who chose to keep their distance away from him, much like Zack did. However, with that said, Cloud did have enough time to develop a series of special attacks that were exclusive to him, namely his Limit Breaker attacks. Limit Breakers are specially enhanced attacks that become accessible once Cloud's battle gauge has filled up over the course of a battle. By the end of Final Fantasy VII, Cloud had access to 7 Limit Breaker attacks that all had various uses and ranges, from his Braver attack, which was able to use a single concentrated power strike, to his finishing touch, which allowed him to summon a vortex which could toss enemies into the air causing great damage, to his Meteor Rain, which could summon a series of self-created meteors that caused wide-scale surface damage, to his most powerful attack, the Omi Slash version 5, which involved Cloud delivering a series of 15 critical power strikes in rapid-fire sensation, causing massive damage to anything it hits. In a whole, Cloud may not be the most sophisticated magic user of his party, but he is certainly bringing the highest concentration of raw, destructive power, making Cloud one of the most dangerous protagonists in all of Final Fantasy. When comparing Tidus and Cloud as magic users, it's clear to see that neither of them are very diverse in this practice, with each of them only applying their magical and special abilities custom to how each of them prefers to fight. For Cloud, all of his magical and special capabilities are simply designed to give him more offensive options. If he can't get close enough to an opponent, he'll simply apply his magical basic spells. If he manages to close his distance enough and needs to finish off his enemies quick and not draw out the fight, he will apply his Limit Breaker attacks. While Tidus' use of his limited magical and special abilities are designed to modify the combative performance of himself and his opponents, and it is in Tidus' much more limited and focused skill set that I believe ultimately gives him the edge in a fight like this. Yes, Cloud certainly has more combative options and a much higher rate of destructive capabilities at his disposal, but most of them would be absolutely useless in a fight against such a fast, non-stationary target like Tidus. And to better hammer out this point, I'd like to turn it over to my good friend Goku. Take it away, Goku.
I may have great power, but what good is it if I can't catch my enemy? It takes more than brute strength to win a fight.
And unfortunately, brute strength is all Cloud is bringing when it comes to his magical and special abilities. Cloud's basic magic spells will be unable to hit Tidus until he completely tires out, and a majority of Cloud's Limit Breaker attacks require the target to be on the ground, and Tidus with his incredible athletic capabilities could easily and quickly get into the edge, dodging most of his Limit Breaker attacks, and Cloud is unable to use his Limit Breaker attacks in rapid fire sensation and would need time to recharge his battle gauge before he could unleash another powerful attack. While all of Tidus' magical and special abilities would work very, very effectively against Cloud, the combination of haste and slow alone would allow him to overwhelm Cloud's offense, and cheer ability would allow him to change his light strikes into power blows, and his delay attack and delay buster and quick hit would allow him to cancel out Cloud's attacks before he could get them off. and Tidus' overdrive attacks may not be able to pack the kind of punch that Cloud's limit breakers can, they certainly would be effective enough to off-balance Cloud, and unfortunately for Cloud, he has no reliable counters or defenses against these kind of techniques. Even with Cloud's physical body possessing superhuman levels of enhanced strength, speed, and reflexes, Tidus would be able to reduce Cloud's combative performance to a regular human's level, putting him somewhat on par with himself, and it is for these reasons that I am giving Tidus the edge in magical and special abilities. Now, in order to add a little bit more diversity in this particular matchup to give it some distance from my Zack Fair versus Tidus matchup that I did a while back, I will not be granting either of them the access to any of their secondary armors that they usually would carry. However, I will be granting them both access to their ultimate weapons for this matchup. So with that out of the way, Tidus' ultimate weapon was dubbed the Calibog, and it was one of the 7 legendary celestial weapons of Spira. The Calibog sword measured at about 4 feet long from the butt of the handle to the tip of the blade, and despite its size, the weapon seemed to weigh pretty lightly, showing as Tidus was able to wield this weapon with not only one arm, but had no difficulty applying his speed and deliver power blows within his overdrive attack maneuvers, leading me to the belief that the Calibog sword was created from a unique metal that was lighter and tougher than our own world's titanium. After being fully enhanced with the use of the Sun Crest and the Sun Gale, the weapon was granted a series of special automatic abilities. It granted a user a break damage limiter, which allowed Tidus to cause more damage than he would otherwise be able to do with just about any other weapon. A triple overdrive enhancer, which allowed him to charge up his overdrive gauge 3 times faster than the normal rate, an evade and counter ability which allowed him to automatically dodge any physical attacks aimed his direction and allowed him to retaliate immediately with a counterattack, and finally it posted a magic counter ability which allowed him to automatically retaliate with a counterattack should he be struck with an offensive magical attack. Despite having all of these abilities at his disposal, the Calibog did possess one distinct weakness. The combative strength of the Calibog sword was tied directly to the health of the user. If the user were to become weakened at any point over the course of a battle, then the sword itself would weaken as well. Cloud's ultimate weapon was dubbed the Ultima Weapon, and Cloud received this weapon after he and his allies engaged and defeated the Ultimate Weapon monster. The Ultima Weapon was described as an enormous glowing broadsword measured at about 5 feet long from the tip of the blade to the butt of the handle. The handguard was curved down over the handle and features 4 cylindrical protrusions, 2 on each side, with a gem-sewed side set in each of the handguards at the bottom of the blade that rises into the center of the blade itself. Like all ultimate weapons throughout Final Fantasy, the Ultima Weapon was granted a number of special abilities to aid the user in combat. The weapon granted Cloud an over 100% increase in strength and hitting power, practically doubling the amount of force and damage Cloud could apply in battle. It also granted a 51% increase in magical damage with all the material equipped with the blade, along with a 24% increase in combative spirit in combat, making Cloud's Ultima Weapon the most powerful and dangerous weapon in the entire game. However, just like most ultimate weapons throughout the Final Fantasy franchise, it did have a weakness of being linking to Cloud's health, meaning that as he weakens over the course of a battle, the strength and power of the sword itself would weaken also. This department is by far the easiest one to call. Though Tidus' Calibog sword and Cloud's Ultimate Weapon share the same weaknesses of being linked to the overall health of their users, it is in their main differences in their special abilities that each weapon has that separates them, and it is clear to see that Tidus' Calibog sword is a superior weapon. All Cloud's Ultimate Weapon does is enhance his already overwhelming powerful brute strength with both his physical blows and his magical spells, but Tidus' weapon can not only do just that, but much more. The Ultimate Weapon allows Cloud to attack at his maximum limit, while the Calibog sword can not only reach such limits, but can go beyond Tidus' own combative limits. And if by some crazy chance Tidus was dumb enough to turn this into a head-to-head engagement, Then every time Cloud took a swing at Tidus, he would automatically evade and counter every single attack. And the same would go if Cloud decided to fall back on his magical spells. And what's more is that Tidus' Caliburg sword would allow him to dish out his overdrive attacks 3 times faster than Cloud. So with all of these advantages that the Caliburg sword would grant Tidus in this fight, there is no question that Tidus' Caliburg sword gets the decisive edge in weapons. Alright guys, you all know how this section's gonna work out. Like all my matchups that I've done involving sword and melee weapon users, I'll be using Star Wars lightsaber fighting forms to help better describe and illustrate the martial and tactical approaches of both these combatants for this particular matchup. So with that out of the way, before the initial destruction of Zanarkand by Sin, Tidus was not very prone to combat, and his physical build made him very ill-prepared to develop into the typical class for a first-grade warrior. However, despite not being the toughest nor the strongest member of his group, he was able to use his athletic prowess and his extensive combat experience over the course of High Seminary Yuna's pilgrimage to develop into the party's primary speed fencer, making him the perfect opener for the group in just about any engagement they encountered. In my personal opinion, being a dedicated speed fencer made him one of the fastest swordsmen in the entire Final Fantasy franchise, second only to Sephiroth. With his martial skills being toned for his experience against multiple opponents at once, and being able to use his speed to work around an opponent's guard with his lack of physical strength, along with using his willfulness to use his entire body as a weapon, Tidus would have been a competent practitioner in Forms 1 Seicho, Form 2 Makashi, and Form 4 Ataru. Seicho was the basic fighting form, allowing users to better tone themselves and how to properly manipulate the movement of their weapon, and its movement set were comprised of wide sweeping strikes to lash out at multiple opponents. However, its focus on wide sweeping maneuvers and techniques left it very not ill-prepared for precision attacks, making it very terrible against a single well-trained opponent. Makashi focused on offense, providing very little defense, and because of its combative focus on precision, a speed user of this form was encouraged to work around an opponent's guard rather than attempt to meet an opponent head-to-head. Makashi's moveset did not allow a user to apply much strength in its blows, and its lack of defensive principles made it very weak against more strength-focused forms, as a power duelist would be able to easily power through and overwhelm Makashi's kinetic maneuvers. Ataru was known as the aggression form, and its entire moveset required the user to constantly stay on the move, allowing one to apply a high velocity of attacks in an attempt to overwhelm an opponent's guard or attack an exposed vector. However, Ataru's high level of combat movements made the practice of this form extremely exhausting, burning through a user's stamina, making a focus in it very unrealistic for a solo long-term engagement. In Tidus' case, despite him not having gone through official proper training during his time as Yuna's guardian, Tidus was a very quick learner on the battlefield, and having the opportunity to fight alongside such prominent warriors like Auron and Kimahri gave Tidus an avenue to build his own unique skill sets to make up for what they lacked. However, despite learning valuable martial lessons on the battlefield that certainly could play to his combative strengths, he clearly lacked on the tactical side of combat, simply acting as an opener to an engagement and being more willing to fall back to a supporting role once the initial phase of the battle had passed. What Tidus lacks as a combatant the most is that he lacks tactical foresight to allow him to apply his skill sets properly, which would allow him to plan out and take control of a fight. Instead, he just decides to make things up as he goes until he spots a potential weakness that he can exploit, and from that point on, he will spam the hell out of it. However, this lack of tactical foresight and his use of dimensional fighting techniques left Tidus with no defensive fallback options should the attempt to overwhelm an opponent with his speed fail, and over the course of a battle, he would leave himself very predictable. Though Cloud Strife never officially made it to the ranks of the Shinra Army Soldier class, his exposure to high levels of Mako, Dr. Hojo's experiments, and impressing Zack Fair's memories and some of his fighting abilities onto his own, along with having an entire year to recover, crafted Cloud into a very skilled warrior in combat. Though Cloud was not nearly as combatively experienced nor as martially toned as his best friend Zack, he did have a fair understanding and knowledge of Zack's own fighting styles. As a first-class member of Soldier, Zack was a highly experienced and flexible fighter with his own extensive training, making him a solid practitioner in Forms 1 Seicho to engage multiple opponents, Form 4 Ataru for mobility, and Form 5 Shien/Jimso so he could apply a strong offense with a reliable defense for counterattacking, and Form 6 Naiman to apply a moderation in his skill sets to allow him to better apply his magical and special attacks within his sword maneuvers. However, with Cloud only having a year to recover and having little to possibly no real actual combat experience in that time frame with Zack's fighting forms, Cloud chose instead to focus on a smaller portion of Zack's skills to develop over the course of Final Fantasy VII and decided to work on the other skill sets when the initial threat of Shinra had passed. It is my belief that with Cloud's physical focus being based on his strength rather than his speed, and with him having a fair amount of magical abilities and limit breakers at his disposal, Cloud would have focused on applying Forms 5 Shien/Jimso and Form 6 Naiman. However, a significant problem that Cloud had by focusing on such a limited portion of Zack's skill set was although he had developed a fair understanding on how to apply these unique maneuvers and properties of his chosen forms, he failed to understand the initial weaknesses that these forms would provide. Weaknesses that even a master swordsman like Zack did not live long enough to find an answer for. Though, on a small note, Cloud would improve upon Zack's fighting forms and develop the answers to these weaknesses over the following 2 years after the events of Final Fantasy VII. By this time, these weaknesses would have been a far bigger problem for Cloud, more so than they ever were for Zack without him even knowing it. On a martial level, Shien/Jimso's lack of mobility made it very terrible against overwhelming split flourish of attacks, and Naiman's focus on moderation made it very weak against precision-based attacks. In short, this Cloud against a fully powered, healthy Sephiroth would treat Cloud as a mere plaything. On a combative tactical level, like Zack, he did not necessarily go into any engagement with a game plan, but instead focused on being a very improvising fighter focused on the needs of the moment. And while this tactical approach to combat is perfectly suited for in-the-moment type of fighting, it meant that Cloud lacked a level of tactical foresight which would allow him to go into a fight with a plan in order for him to better allow himself to take control of the fight. And it seems that this was something that he would continue to fail to develop, as even during his later years, his tactics were focused on the here and now and was something that Sephiroth took advantage of, allowing him to take the fight to a location of his choice, giving him home field advantage. In a whole, Cloud during the events of Final Fantasy VII was a proficient user of Zack's fighting forms and combative approaches, but he was very brash in combat, bringing a very straightforward approach in every engagement he fought, which would and has backfired on him against the very best in his class of fighter. As martial fighters and battle tacticians, Tidus and Cloud are very much on par with each other, as both of them suffer from similar weaknesses as combatants. Both of them as fighters are dictated by their physical focuses. Both of them are not toned for one-on-one combat, as a majority of their battlefield experience was prone to group engagements. Neither of them can match the other in their physical combative focuses, with Tidus being unable to match Cloud's strength and durability, and Cloud being unable to match Tidus' speed and maneuverability. Both of them suffer from a lack of tactical foresight, with both of them just making things up as they go, or simply reacting to the opponent's techniques, preventing either of them from being able to really take control of this fight. However, despite sharing similar combative flaws, Tidus and Cloud as combatants did develop themselves under very different circumstances and conditions. Cloud as a fighter simply took a specific portion of what he had seen Zack do in combat when he was a much younger infantryman and simply tooled it for group engagements, allowing his allies to make up for whatever factors he lacked as combatant. And he would not develop a full understanding of the defects of Zack's fighting forms provided until much later in his life, giving him no real chance to fully develop his skills properly over the course of Final Fantasy VII. But for Tidus, from the moment Auron gave him that sword as a gift from his father Jecht, Tidus was forced to learn the ways of combats on the go, and having a chance to fight along such prominent warriors did allow Tidus to understand what he could and should not do in combat. As individuals, I'm willing to admit that on a personal note, Cloud had gone through harder things in his life, both physically and emotionally, but as combatants, and people, I really want to stress out this next statement out because I know that a lot of you are going to disagree with me big time, but in terms of overall combative difficulties, when it comes to Tidus and Cloud with their parties, after comparing all of the unavoidable battles and stakes that both Final Fantasy VII and Final Fantasy X had set, it was Tidus and company that had gone through much difficult scenarios and trials over the course of Yuna's pilgrimage to get the final Aeon, then going on to challenge the bringer of death, Sin, and ultimately defeat Yu Yevon, ending a tradition of life for Spirit that had existed for 1,000 years. Tidus' skill set in retrospect makes him a very significantly weaker version of Sephiroth, and if Zack's skill sets in his prime could not stop this particular skill set, then this version of Cloud would be even more ill-prepared to engage these tactics and techniques, and with this factor and the conditions of Tidus' combative experience would grant him a better understanding of his martial and tactical limitations on how best to apply them, ultimately putting him slightly above Cloud in this department. And it is for these reasons that I'm giving Tidus the slight edge in martial skills and as a battle tactician. Before I share my final thoughts, I would just like everyone to know that I made this matchup because I wanted to, not because it was asked of me. But we all know that Advent Children Cloud would make quick work of Tidus, having not only developed all of the aspects of his physicality, but had taken Zack's skill set and not only fixed it, but had evolved it to a level that Zack never had a chance to. But ultimately, Cloud by this time, by the end of Final Fantasy VII, would not be combatively prepared to take down someone like Tidus. What this ultimately comes down to is that Cloud's overall combative focus, with the use of his physicality, his magical abilities, the function of his chosen weapon, and his combative approach are tooled for nothing more than a straightforward offensive approach in an attempt to overwhelm an opponent, and this mentality is simply not enough to guarantee victory. What Cloud lacks is the knowledge of knowing how to apply the combative style that he copied from Zack Fair properly. Even by the end of Final Fantasy VII, after everything that he had gone through with his friends and allies, Cloud clearly was not on the same combative level that Zack was by the time of his death. Members of Soldier are trained to be one-man armies, and Cloud was anything but that. The difference between Zack Fair and Cloud Strife by this point is that Zack Fair was a properly trained combatant who spent years learning how to react on the spot and knew how to balance his skill set and execute them properly, even if it meant that he was getting beaten and knows that the best he could do is delay the inevitable. All Cloud did was take a portion of Zack's skill set and develop it over the course of, say, less than a year and tool it for group engagements. Cloud was the centerpiece of a group's offense, not a one-man army like members of Soldier are supposed to be. In my Zack Fair vs Tidus matchup, the main question that I asked that ultimately decided the verdict of that matchup was not whether or not Zack could outfight Tidus, but if he could simply outlast him. Zack's years of training and experience against the Sephiroth training hologram, and even the real Sephiroth, may not have allowed Zack to develop a proper response to this style of fighting. He was able and capable of holding it off for a good portion of time, even if the fight did devolve into a one-sided battle of attrition in favor of Sephiroth, and Tidus clearly is not on Sephiroth's level in terms of combative effectiveness. In this experience and combative knowledge of knowing how to respond to this style of fighting is something that Cloud lacked, and his failing to take the time to understand the combative defects that Zack's style of fighting suffered from did not help at all. While Tidus had plenty of time and experience learning how to apply his combative style properly in combat, along with witnessing the combative style of others in his party who not only have and apply all of Cloud's combative traits, but easily exceed his. Kamari's physiology of being a Ronso warrior easily exceeds Cloud's level of physical performance at this point, despite having the use of Genova cells and his physical focus being on strength and durability. Auron's typical starting combative approach in combat was to use a straightforward power offense similar to Cloud's, and Lulu's use of dark magic easily outclasses Cloud in both variety and levels of combative devastation. Ultimately, Cloud is simply bringing nothing to this fight that Tidus hasn't already seen before. while Cloud is applying a fighting approach that is completely ill-prepared to respond to a dedicated speed fencer like Tidus. Now, not to completely praise Tidus in his approach, because trust me, compared to other people, it's not that great. His approach to combat is also very one-dimensional, and what's worse is that Cloud actually had the opportunity to develop the combative approach that would work perfectly against Tidus' approach to combat. To take down Tidus, all anyone needs to do is be physically maneuverable and develop a solid defense. Tidus' approach is based on speed and working around an opponent's offense, rather than trying to meet them head-to-head. Because of this, Tidus needs to constantly be staying on the move to prevent himself from being a stagnant target. But because of this, even being in as good a shape as he is, his approach to combat burns up massive amounts of his stamina quickly, making him not suited for long-term engagements. And Zack Fair's skill set did come with a solid defense, which was strong enough to allow him to at least hold off Sephiroth for a time, and it is this factor that would have allowed someone like Zack to outlast Tidus. But with Cloud deciding to neglect this trait of Zack's fighting style, it would not allow Cloud to do the same. I would like to go on record by stating that in the conditions that these two combatants are in, both of them would be easily defeated by just about any well-trained opponent who has a balanced set of skills and knows how to spot out potential combative flaws in their opponents and exploit them. And between these two, they are very much on par with each other in terms of their level of combative focuses, but in this match, Tidus would have a much easier time taking advantage of Cloud's weaknesses. Tidus cannot match Cloud's strength and durability, but Cloud cannot match Tidus' speed and maneuverability. Cloud may have more offensive magical abilities at his disposal to give him more options in battle, but Tidus' magic can greatly affect his and Cloud's combative performance, rendering most of Cloud's magical abilities and limit breakers useless. Both Cloud's Ultima Sword and Tidus' Caliburg Sword share the same weakness of being linked to the user's health, but Cloud's Ultima Sword only enhances his strength, while Tidus' Caliburg gives him more countering abilities that are automatically applied. And as fighters and battle tacticians, Cloud lacks the right approach of combat and knowledge to properly outlast such a skilled speed fencer, while Tidus has all of the skills and knowledge he needs from his time fighting alongside his allies to avoid Cloud's strength for a time and focus on wearing Cloud down. And thanks to the weaknesses of Cloud's Ultima Sword, by the time he eventually gets a hit on Tidus, at the rate that he would be going, the amount of damage that Cloud would cause Tidus will have been greatly decreased in no time, making it harder for Cloud to fight back effectively over a short period of time. Now let's set up this fight. Let's say that this takes place right after Cloud and his friends have defeated Sephiroth and have saved the world from the oncoming meteor. As a final thank you to Aerith, Cloud asks Sid to take the airship to the outskirts of the Forgotten Capital. Cloud asks everyone on board to stay with the airship while he goes off alone. As Cloud walks into the pool of water where he laid Aerith's body to rest, he says a final thank you to Aerith and promises her that he will never forget her for what she did. All of a sudden, the pool of water begins to glow, and Cloud is blinded by a bright light. As Cloud's vision returns, he finds himself standing in a strange place, when suddenly, a strange woman appears in front of him. She reveals that her name is Cosmos, the goddess of harmony, and she has come with a warning. She informs Cloud that a great darkness will be returning to his world very soon, and that he needs to get stronger in order to combat this threat. Cosmos offers to test his skills, and Cloud agrees to the challenge. Cosmos then summons another warrior from another world to challenge him. If Cloud is victorious, then he will be ready for this oncoming threat, but if he's defeated, then he will need to get stronger once he returns to his world. A warrior wearing very odd clothes appears in front of him to face him. Cloud pulls out his Ultima Sword and points it at his opponent, saying, "Well, this guy doesn't look so tough." His opponent draws his own blade and replies, "Don't get so ahead of yourself." And their battle begins. Cloud opens up with a forward power strike, but Tidus easily evades, and with the properties of his Caliburg sword, he immediately counterattacks and hits Cloud with a light hit faster than he can react, staggering him. Cloud attempts a second power blow, but again, Tidus easily evades and counters once again. Cloud attempts a third attack, but this time Tidus jumps away and begins to run, convincing Cloud to give chase. Even with his enhanced physical properties, Cloud is having a very difficult time keeping up with Tidus as he is simply moving too fast. At this point, while chasing Tidus, Cloud fires off a series of his fire, lightning, and magic spells at Tidus in an attempt to off-balance him, but none of his spells hit. With Tidus still running around, Cloud decides to fire off one of his more powerful Limit Breaker attacks. Cloud jumps into the air and fires off his Meteor Rain attack, but Tidus manages to dodge all the meteor impacts by maneuvering his body and launching himself into the air, avoiding the attack safely. As Tidus lands back on the ground, he immediately counterattacks with his own Slice and Dice overdrive, hitting Cloud and knocking him back. Cloud recovers immediately, but notices that the light from his Ultima Sword is beginning to dim. Seeing this, Cloud takes a moment to think and recognizes that this fighter's speed reminds him of someone from his past, a legendary soldier he remembers too well, and wonders if this is a sign of things to come. But he immediately shakes off these thoughts and re-engages. He continues his power offense, believing that he will eventually connect and overwhelm his opponent, but Tidus keeps far enough ahead of him to tease Cloud without putting himself too much in danger. After a few more moments, Cloud notices that his opponent is beginning to slow down and tire a bit, and recognizes an opening. Cloud fires off another one of his Limit Breaker attacks. This time he decides to dish out his finishing touch attack, creating a vortex. Tidus, having seen something very similar to this, knows that he's getting too tired of all of his running and jumping around to outrun Cloud's attack. He then gets sucked into the vortex and gets tossed hard to the ground, taking great damage. As he recovers, Cloud immediately charges at Tidus, and him not expecting the attack takes a direct power combo strike from Cloud, knocking him back again. Tidus at this point is badly injured and knows that he can't take another hit like that. He sees Cloud charge at him once again to finish him off, but this time Tidus has an idea. This time he fires off a slow spell at Cloud, who was not expecting it, turning his charge into a slow jog. With Cloud now having his combative performance greatly decreased, Tidus takes this opportunity to cast a final cheer and haste spell on himself, preparing to retaliate. Both men know that they don't have much in them, with Cloud having taken a lot of light hits thanks to Tidus' speed, and Tidus nearing the end having taken 2 seriously damaging direct power attacks, which, if Cloud had been at full strength, would have finished him off. Cloud stops his charge and begins prepping his Omi Slash attack, but he's moving much slower than he normally would be, and Tidus, with his now enhanced speed, charges out and dishes out a quick hit strike, then immediately follows it up with a delayed Buster attack, cancelling out Cloud's Omi Slash preparation. Tidus immediately follows up with his Blitz Ace strike and dishes out a series of speed and power blows to Cloud, bringing him to his knees. Tidus then stabs his sword into the ground to deliver the final blow, while Cloud recognizes the inevitable. The light from his Ultima Sword has all but faded, and he has simply taken too many hits, and on top of that, thanks to Tidus' slow spell, Cloud cannot jump or maneuver fast enough to clear the blast radius. Tidus then kicks a Blitzball at Cloud, which hits him directly, knocking Cloud unconscious. Tidus lands to the ground and drops to his knees, exhausted, but still standing. Cosmos reappears and returns the 2 warriors back to their worlds, and as Cloud regains consciousness, he finds himself in the medical bay of Cid's airship. His friends ask him what happened, as they all saw a great light coming from the distance from the Forgotten Capital, and by the time they got there, they found him in the water unconscious. Cloud states that he's not sure exactly what happened, but he knows that a new threat will be appearing soon, and he needs to do some serious training to get ready for it. And thus, I declare Tidus, the captain of the Xanarkin Apes, the winner. Oh boy. Now, of course, I'm fully aware that just like my Orin vs. Squall matchup that I did some time ago, that some of you may find this outcome pretty controversial, and I'm sure a number of you will certainly disagree with me. But I made this matchup in the hopes of convincing some of you that these 2 characters, whose reputation amongst the fan base are completely opposite to each other, that as combatants, they are very much on the same level. People hold Cloud Strife to such a high standard, not realizing that until he became the dual sword-wielding badass that we came to know him as in Advent Children, that during the time frame of the game, he really wasn't all that special, and he had a lot of help along the way. And in my opinion, even by the end of Final Fantasy VII, he still wouldn't even rank on the same level as Zack Fair in terms of his skills levels as a fighter. While a number of the same people hold Tidus to such low standards simply because they're judging him from his personality instead of his skill level. And even those who do recognize him as a fighter don't give him the credit he deserves, believing that he sucks because of his lack of experience. When in reality, in terms of actual combat experience, he had just as much, if not more combat experience than most. And unlike Cloud, who had to spend his entire time over the game copying someone else's fighting style, Tidus was a much faster learner, developing a skill set that was exclusive to him and him alone. But like always, this outcome was just my own personal opinion. Do you agree with me that Tidus' knowledge and combative speed would be too overwhelming for Cloud to the point where he would have a hard time responding? Or do you believe that Cloud would be able to last long enough for Tidus to tire out, leaving him open to Cloud's overwhelming offense? Share your thoughts and opinions with me and everyone else in the comments down below, and please remember to be respectful. I do these videos for fun, not to create unhealthy conflicts. Be sure to like and subscribe to keep track of me and my future versus matchups and other videos, and like always, thank you guys for watching, you're awesome, and to celebrate my Versus Series Season 2 finale, I will be bringing an old legend from my very first matchup back, and I will let you, the viewers, choose his opponent. One of them is one I personally want to see happen, and the other one has been debated many times in the past, and we may end up seeing them in a future video from a much more popular Versus series. So with that done, I will see you guys next time.